Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on shaping strategy beyond borders. So hopefully this will be a really useful discussion, whether you're an investor, whether you're a leadership executive or a business owner, or you're an advisor to the business. There will be something of use in here today. Now, a few housekeeping rules. If you think of a question, please submit them during the chat. The team will field these. Hopefully, we'll get a chance to answer them live at the end. And if not, we'll respond to you directly via email or more than happy to set up a follow-up conversation. So the hypothesis that we're going to sort of propose and talk about today is that global growth for your portfolio companies is no longer optional, that the next wave of winners will be those who have their portfolio companies capitalize on international expansion whilst managing risk and profitability at the same time. So that's going to be the theme that we sort of talk about through today. So a little bit about myself. My name is Andrew Fahey, and I am the CEO of the Briars Group. Now, I've spent all of my career in outsourced professional services, initially in the UK and then internationally. And I've done this across accounting firms, legal firms, tax advisory, HR, financial services, and payroll and workforce. So lots of experience in outsourced professional services. And over that career, I've had the fortunate experience to be involved in multiple private equity exits and MBO buyouts. I've also had experience in public markets and completed a first round pilot fishing exercise and also a P-backed trade merger with a US firm, where I then spent 3 years working on the US board as well, before I was headhunted for the Briars opportunity that we're going to be discussing today. So hopefully along that journey of far too many years to want to remember now, I've picked up some useful experience, which will be great to chat about today. So if that's me, let's look at the business. So quick introduction of Briars. Well, the business has been going for 30 years now. And over that time, really, its core reason for existence has been to help businesses scale from their domestic regions into new countries and territories. And over those 30 years, we've helped around 3,000 businesses expand across 100 different countries. And we do that by becoming an extension to that business, a real trusted partner. So we can provide strategic guidance, we can provide one-off pieces of compliance work, or we also become a complete operational extension to your team and in effect become your HR and finance teams for these countries as well. So rather than have a plethora of staff around the world and multiple different service providers, anything outside of your HQ, we can operate. So that's sort of the way to think about us. We're your international FC and HRD. We provide a whole wide range of services, and this isn't all the services. If you want to see them in more detail, visit the website or give us a call. But really simplistically, we chunk them up into 4 distinct areas. Our HR services, our payroll services, which are all the different types of engagements for the modern workforce, our accounting and compliance services, and workforce services. So a whole wide range. And this wheel actually exists as an animation on the website as well, where you can start to see how our services align with your strategic goals and complement each other as well. So that hopefully a little bit of background about me, a little bit of background on the business, just to set the seed of why hopefully we'll be able to help with this hypothesis today. So why does this discussion matter today? So if our hypothesis is at least the next decade of growth for your portfolio companies or your own company, if you're a management executive, will be global. It's no longer reserved for large blue chip corporates. It's available to all companies, all shapes and sizes, irrespective of sector. Now, this probably was always going to happen, but it definitely got supercharged post-COVID, where we all got used to dealing, managing, and leading in a more remote environment. And now it's just a core part of business. And it can impact your business in a multitude of ways. It can whether you're actually traditionally landing and expanding in new markets, or you just now have a global talent footprint. Either way, your business is globally expanding. And that's being driven additionally to the sort of macro trends, because our domestic markets are slowing, they're reaching saturation points, but we all still want growth. We all still want diversification of revenue. So is global growth the answer to that? And within this discussion today, we're sort of going to look at two different themes. So, why our strategy needs to be a global growth strategy. And if that's the case, what skills need to now exist within businesses at a leadership level and an advisory level to help us all execute on these strategies. So, it's not lost on me. Clearly, clearly the fact that I am a CEO of a global expansion business means I'm going to say this. So what I thought we would do would start with some data points which aren't from me to help sort of set the scene around why we believe that international growth is so important now. Now, all of these data points have come from three different sources and all around the sort of big four. So from GT's mid-market momentum report, from EY's how the drivers of PE valuation are changing, and PwC's future of work report. So hopefully some great independent sources for us to be able to pull out some data points. So I guess the first one here is that 71% of UK mid-market companies plan to expand within the next 2 years. And what that means is it's highly likely that either the portfolio companies that you have now, or the businesses that you have in your pipeline, or the business that you're leading or advising will already have some form of global expansion plan. But that also means so do the competitors of the businesses that you're talking to as well. So we really sort of need to be mindful of, we're not future gazing here. This is 75% of all businesses think that they will be doing this within the next 2 years. And that number increases even further when those businesses are private equity backed. And hopefully at the end of this, you'll understand why that happens, because when professional investors invest in a business, then there are huge opportunities to gain out of global expansion. And I talked earlier that global expansion isn't just reserved now for the sort of huge businesses, the big global blue chip corporates. All businesses are able to gain access to this. And we can see here that sort of the different sort of sizes and shapes, but also the professional services markets that support them as well. So whether you're privately owned today, whether you're owned by professional investors, or you're in an advisory function, there are clear macro trends that are certainly suggesting that businesses are already and about to execute on global expansion strategies. And so if the sort of macro trends there, it then brings us on to the sort of next question of how many businesses in your portfolio are actually equipped to execute on this strategy. Yep. So why do those data points look so strong that the big four are teasing out? Well, global expansion could be the answer to that mythical challenge we all wrestle of trying to get top line growth and EBITDA to grow in equal dimensions. We all want pace, we all want scale, whatever that role is that you're playing on this webinar today, whether you're sat here as an investor, an advisor, or on management team. I think we'd all say, yes, top line and bottom line growth is the sort of holy grail that we're all sort of trying to chase. And with global expansion, there's an opportunity to try to capitalize on that. So we can see that a business that actually has an international growth strategy grows 1.5 times faster than those businesses who focus on their own domestic region. So, from an investor's perspective, that's an opportunity to shorten the investment window or overachieve on the investment thesis. And 70% of those businesses who do expand globally deliver revenue in year one. And that's very different to when you're starting a business, and it can be a much, much slower sort of build up. And that's because the business already understands the widget that it makes and the service that it delivers. So actually a large amount of the IP and the intellect and the deliveries there. The challenge is understanding how to do this in new markets, new cultures, and obviously across different territories, which will start to come earlier on. And I said earlier that it's not just large, big sort of corporate businesses. 60% of small businesses capitalize on this within their first year as well. So, when we look at this now, there are people in their garage making sort of craft pictures which they sell on Etsy to international businesses. This is no longer a sort of, as I said, blue chip corporates. Businesses of all shapes and sizes are looking at this now and really having it an important part of their growth strategy. And then finally, when we think about our target addressable market, 95% of all global consumers sit outside the UK and the US. And I think we're all guilty of thinking that when we talk about international expansion, I imagine most people on here today assume that we're talking about UK businesses coming to the US and US businesses coming the other way. But actually, there's a huge amount of this target addressable market that's available to us when we start to open up and really dissect these international opportunities. So, why is it such an important strategic advisors if the macro trends are there and then the big four are teasing out data points and we can see actually real KPIs that show within 12 to 24-month windows, these go from being sort of in planning to genuine execution and ROI phase. Why is that happening? Well, the first one, and probably the most simple Ron Seal version of this, is access to new markets. Moving in, taking your business, your portfolio company on an international expansion strategy. It opens up new countries. It opens up new customers, increased marketing pools. It will just, because it increases your target addressable market, if no other dynamic of your sales or marketing change, just selling to more people will deliver more growth. And that's sort of a bit of a simple Ron Seal version. But actually, it really helps us with risk diversification and in a private equity owned environment, in every environment, but especially if this asset is going to go through regular due diligence exercises, we want to make sure that we really think about that. So, spreading your business, spreading your revenue and your products and services over multiple jurisdictions really helps. If one market slows, another can offset that, and spreading those sort of revenue streams really helps de-risk that asset. And I talked earlier that sometimes global expansion isn't just having your business trading in multiple entities. It can be that your workforce spreads across multiple countries and entities, and it can be both versions of that. But by doing that, you're tapping into new talent pools. You're getting more innovation. You're getting different perspectives. It's supercharging your business and making you smarter, and all that sort of IP and intelligence really helps drive your business forward. And once you've got a larger target addressable market, and we've now got more people with better experiences and a really supercharged DNA pool, businesses can then look at economies of scale and the target operating model. So you can look at centralizing services and putting certain functions in countries and regions that operate better. So you can now capitalize on real global efficiencies and start to scale that asset far more sensibly than you would have done previously. And then clearly, a business that has a global presence will be more valuable than a business that has a small local domestic presence as well. So I guess the conclusion here is that businesses that take on international expansion strategies and execute it well, they tend to outperform the domestic equivalents on all measures, not just top line growth. So it's no wonder that the data points are so strong when the evidence supports that. Now, whether you're an investor, an executive, or advisor, it can be really useful to sort of look at both sides of the coin here. And I've seen this dynamic firsthand through my own experiences, but we see it with our clients on a daily basis. There can be different wants and needs, desires from management and investors, and it's just good to talk about those and get them out in the open. So, sort of, firstly, from an investor's perspective, well, we all want our portfolio companies to scale. Clearly, there'll be growth expectations within the initial investment thesis, and we want to outperform them. And so, a global strategy can quickly get strong alignment with those around the table to say, actually, if we increase our target addressable market, if we understand the local nuances, then actually we can grow much quicker than expected. So, investors tend to gravitate to this position of global expansion pretty quickly. And one of the things I talked about earlier was also de-risking revenue streams and de-risking the businesses. And again, it's great from an investor's perspective to have revenue spread across multiple products, services, markets, because we want our risk profile to be as low as possible, because ultimately we don't want any nasty price chip surprises during the DD process. So getting ahead of that and proactively spreading that risk really puts us in a strong position. So from an investor's perspective, we're sort of pushing against an open door with those two parts. Excuse me one second. Hmm. Now, where there are challenges from an investor's perspective, um, and all good executive teams think like this too, is we don't want cash burn. We don't want it to sort of quickly burn through cash on ill thought through projects. So we want to grow, but we want to be mindful of when to grow and when's the right time in our investment cycle to do this. Um, and I guess we see that problem a lot. Around 50% of all our new sales inquiries start with some form of, hey, we tried to do this ourselves. We didn't think it would be that hard. We didn't really want to invest in it. So we dipped our toe in the water and now we're in some form of trouble. Whether that be an employment challenge in a country that they don't know, or whether it's the local authorities who suddenly sent them a letter saying that they owe corporate taxes, but they were told that there would be no permanent establishment risk, and that's completely untrue. So making sure that investors are very mindful of what cash burn, but and risk. Let's make sure we manage those. Um, and all of those really lead to, as we go through a due diligence process, we want to be able to show a really clean business, and in every jurisdiction that we've thought about all those regulatory elements correctly and have the right controls in place. So understandably a low tolerance for that, but really sort of find the top line growth and the risk management really appealing. So when we speak to investors, that's sort of the perspective that we see them from. Now, management's perspective can sometimes be different, especially early on in the relationship. And the reason why we want to talk about this is because if it's not handled correctly, it can sort of derail expansion plans. And if you remember earlier on, we now know that somewhere between 70 to 85% of our competitors are already working on these. So if there's ever a scenario where management and investors are misaligned, which means we don't capitalize on growth, we should be talking about that. So, and this isn't all management teams, so this is trying to sort of just tease out themes. But when we speak to management teams, it can sort of differ a little bit. So the reality is, and we all know this, that especially early on in the investment cycle, they were probably running too lean ahead of the investment. They were maximizing EBITDA to make the proposition as attractive as possible. but they're now managing all these new overheads, new dynamics, new cultures, which can lead to sort of a distraction and a focus. They're trying to impress you guys ultimately, and then that can make them be a little bit too internally focused and not lifted their head up. And so sometimes that can lead to them pushing back, uh, deprioritizing the ideas, or worse, saying, "Yeah, no, no, we've tried that in the past. It didn't work." And as I said earlier on, that's a huge competitive threat now that we're bringing into our organization because of the sort of the inability to cope with the new overheads of the investors. It's hard, right? We sort of get it. And because they're running in this sort of stretch way, and they've got all you guys that are now sort of, hey, I'm here to help, but I also want to look at every measure that you've done. It can bring an element of nervousness and a worry that they'll expose weaknesses. And if they feel like they're going to get exposed in front of the new ownership, that can also sort of tend to deprioritize things. So I think it's important that both sides of the fence recognize that coin, that investors clearly want the top line growth, and they clearly want the diversification of revenue, but they want to do it well. And management are probably stretched quite thinly and are still dealing with the overhead of this, and are sort of going to be nervous around how this is going to work, which the combination of those two things means that we might miss out on this opportunity, and our asset gets overtaken by those competitors who are capitalizing on this global expansion strategy. So I said earlier, we've been doing this for 30 years and we've helped 3,000 businesses. And so it's always useful to share some common things. We all like that as humans, to sort of have a little look at other people's misfortunes and where they've gone wrong. And hopefully these will then turn into sort of tips and hints for people. So what are the common things that we see happening? What are the common mistakes and pitfalls that can happen? The first one is just underestimating how hard it can be. Um, it looks great on paper. The reality is it can be much harder. We see businesses that burn cash and it fails quickly. It's hard enough understanding your own employment and tax regimes, and once you spread that over multiple countries, it can sort of happen exponentially. And it's also down to some great marketing of some businesses who do small elements of global expansion. So, likes of Deal now are high street brands. They're involved in Arsenal Football Club, and their strapline is, "Hey, it's as easy as just click here, boom, you've got a global workforce today." And in certain narrow scenarios, that's completely true. But in lots of cases, it's not true. So sometimes management teams just misunderstand how hard it is and get themselves into hot water, or buy something that they think they need, but actually they need something very different. The second thing is a cultural. Um, Businesses misunderstand how hard it is to integrate businesses from different cultures, especially on the sort of UK US dynamic, because the language is so similar. It's just a case of turning all the S's into Z's, or vice versa. But it's much harder than that. It takes time. It needs real effort and experience to stitch global teams together and get all that benefit I talked about earlier of this really improved gene pool and talent. And what that means is boards need to think about that experience when they're recruiting, or they're trying to build their team of advisors. What sort of global workforce experience does your business have? So cultural misalignment, just trying to force things together. And that leads on to the next one, really, that businesses tend to just treat it as a small bolt-on acquisition. We'll just buy this whole small business in a different country and we'll get it to work exactly the same way as we do, in a sort of hostile takeover-esque scenario. And that's where things tend to fail. As I said, there's a cultural, economic, There's a language element to consider to this. There's a corporate taxation. There's a risk management element to it. It isn't just a sort of same as a bolt-on acquisition in your own domestic region. It's much more complicated, and when people have gone in with that mindset, we sort of see that causing a lot of issues. The second one, the sort of next to last one is sort of people searching for a unicorn. They assume there's one master system, global expansion finance.com and global expansion payroll.com that can do everything. And that's pretty much not the case. You are opening a world to extra technology, extra processes, extra procedures, more data, more GDPR and equivalent sort of complexities as you're moving around. So planning this and now lifting up your data and tech strategy and your sort of OPEX element of the tech strategy to now understand how complex that needs to be from a global perspective. We see businesses sort of fall over and they're trying to sort of shoehorn things that aren't fit for the job now that's at hand. And then finally, probably the most common out of all of these is it's just given to somebody as an extra objective. They already had 10 things to do, which probably included double in size in your own jurisdiction. And then, and also open the US division was chucked in at the end of their objectives. And all that means is there's just not enough hours in a day, not enough brain power, not enough people. The project isn't given the right support. And then all of those problems that I spoke about previously tend to happen because that just sort of wasn't considered correctly. So that sort of segues nicely, and there clearly was always going to be a little bit of a sales pitch in this, but hopefully too much. So I guess where can we help you and your portfolio companies and your leadership teams with this? Well, we can do it across sort of 3 core pillars. We can help you build the plan. We can help you build business cases, look at the ROI, and we can help you in the planning phase. Yeah. We also do lots of work with private equity and management on due diligence, either during the due diligence process or after, where we can help validate either the global workforce already, employment and tax risk, or actually the suitability to execute a global expansion plan. But then more often than not, we work with our customers to operationalize the plan. So in effect, we're your back office teams. We become your accounting, HR, and payroll teams for all those sub-regions, and we work with you to roll all of that data and all that information up into your sort of HQ reporting pack. So it really works well from an investor's perspective. It works well from an ROI and project tracking perspective. So we can help on all 3 of those. And we can do this across the globe. I said we work in over 100 countries. All of our clients get a global dedicated account manager with decades of experience that I will be in your local region as well. And they're there to quarterback everything for you, because this will be a really complicated infrastructure. There will be technical people all around the world, but you have the one point of contact, or the one throat to choke for any Americans that are in the audience today. And then in addition to that sort of operational team, so we're sort of that swan for you. You have one point of contact for anything that's outside of your domestic region. And we roll that, and we're doing all the hard work, managing and quarterbacking this sort of global back office infrastructure for you. And then even though most of our clients move through that sort of planning and risk management stage where we become the operational engine, we try to restart that cycle every year. So we will sit down with our clients, whether that be the investors or management, or in many cases both, and say, help us understand your growth strategy, help us understand the challenges with the business. And we sort of restart that process of where can we help. So we don't just become static on a delivery. We then look to see where else we can supercharge your business and allow you to do what you do best, which is drive and deliver that business. And we just block and tackle all these regulatory headaches for you, giving you the best chance of success. So hopefully that was reasonably useful for people. And to summarize the conversations that we've had, growth is now global. This isn't happening in the future. It's happening now. There's macro data that confirms it. Our domestic markets are are sort of struggling and poor at best. And we can see data that shows our competitors are already significantly far on executing these global expansion plans. We talked about how it can be a great lever for future shareholder value if deployed correctly by making use of hybrid operating models of perm staff, ICs, contractors, fractional resource, by creating shared services and having global centers of excellence and having partners that can help take away all these headaches to help you operationalize all the regulatory elements and you focus on what you do best. But we've also learned that it can be complicated and that many people go into this with maybe a sort of blinkered view of the world of how hard can it be, and it quickly becomes difficult, and that puts people off, and therefore they're ultimately overtaken by your competitors. And then finally, and it's just good to talk about this. There can be subtle misalignments between investors and management. And sometimes these growth strategies get deprioritized through a sort of self-preservation perspective. And if we can be of any use to help sort of alleviate some of those concerns and almost be a toolkit that's bolted onto help, we'd be happy to do so. So hopefully that was a useful discussion for everyone. As I said, if there are questions here and now, I think we're pretty much over time, but we've got some questions. We will come back to you on email. My details are here. Please reach out directly. Find me on LinkedIn. We love to help where we can. And thank you very much for your attendance. We appreciate everybody's busy, so we're always very respectful of your time. Thank you very much.